Ladies and gentlemen, whether you follow chess or not, you may be familiar with the name Magnus Carlsen. That is because Magnus has been the best chess player in the world for about a decade and a half at this point, and he will likely go down as the greatest chess player of all time. But just like in any sport, we are constantly searching for who is the future generation. Who is going to be a part of that next wave of athletes and players and participants who is going to ultimately hold the throne one day. Now, in chess, the Grandmaster title, on average, is now getting awarded at an age younger and younger every year. People who are 12 and 13 years old are becoming Grandmasters. In fact, at the beginning of 2024, this news broke. Andy Woodward became a Grandmaster. Andy Woodward is American, and his coach is Yaroslav Jerebuch, strong Grandmaster as well. But if you notice the blurb at the bottom, it says that Hikaru Nakamura has been generously sponsoring weekly lessons, likely multiple sessions a week. So Hikaru Nakamura himself, streamer, YouTuber, top 3 player in the world, and a candidate in chess, has basically been raising a protege to take the throne from Magnus. And in this video, I'm going to show you a mini match that Andy Woodward played against Magnus Carlsen a couple of days ago on chess.com. It's the beautiful thing about chess right now. You used to have to wait for the young Grandmasters to play the best players at the major tournaments. Now they can just play online. And they played so many games, and Andy beat Magnus. Magnus lost to the youngest Grandmaster on the planet right now, who's 13 years old. Nobody else is younger. Now, he's not the youngest Grandmaster of all time to get the title, but at the moment, he's the youngest Grandmaster in the world, and he managed to beat Magnus Carlsen in a few games. That doesn't mean he gets the title or anything like that, but so I'm going to show you a few of the games they played. This is the first game Andy Woodward ever played against Magnus Carlsen. He opened with d4, and Magnus went for the Dutch defense. He's playing very provocatively. Bishop g5 is the move that Andy chose. By the way, 3,051. I mean, that is a monster rating. His chess.com username, I believe, is a biblical verse, psalm, and actually I looked it up, and it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Now, no God from any religion would be able to help me with my chess, but it is a very religious time at the moment. It's a holy time right now in the world. We have obviously people celebrating Ramadan, so I believe it's Ramadan Mubarak to those participating and celebrating. Also, Easter is coming up. Just a good time, all right? So sending all of you well wishes. Now let's get back to this brutal chess action. Magnus went for this really aggressive approach to kick out Andy's pieces. Andy struck right back, all right? That's the thing about these young players, is that they're very good positionally, but they're also very aggressive. And you might be shocked in this game. The sides clashed, and Magnus sacrificed material. He gave up his knight in the center to shove Andy's pieces backwards, but Andy is up a knight. His first ever game against Magnus Carlsen, and on move 15, he has an extra piece. Now he just has to defend himself. Magnus tramps Andy's knight on the edge of the board. Andy jumps it into the position, and Magnus keeps firing away with pawns. You'll notice Andy is down about 40 seconds on the clock. That's half nerves, and it's also half just like, I gotta make sure I play all the best moves in this position. Look at Magnus with the discovered attack, and all of a sudden we see the evaluation drop back down to equal as Magnus bulldozes the position and sacrifices a bunch of material, and it seems like he's building the edge on the clock, he's building the edge in the position, but Andy is staying calm and maintains a very big advantage. 1.4, first ever game against Magnus. 13 years old, and he's winning. Bishop e6, and Andy goes straight into an endgame where he is just up. Like, no questions asked. He is pinning this bishop to this rook. The only problem for him is he has 33 seconds. b6 from Magnus. Now, f4 here is probably required. It looks like Andy's completely winning. Magnus can't move anything, but he's the best endgame player of all time, and he's probably the best defensive player of all time. It's very close between him and Hikaru, and it's probably Hikaru on a given day. It's one or the other. And I mean, he just gets out of the way, and he just goes for an endgame of knight and rook versus 2 rooks. And Andy's winning, and he's just got to get the pawn moving, but he just can't. He's stuck. Look at Andy. He's got 20 seconds. He's going for Magnus. First ever game. He's going to get a win, but Magnus is just too elusive. And Andy here panics. 18 seconds versus 104. He just doesn't. He's not feeling it. He's trying to push. But if he pushes, Magnus is just going to trap him over here and make it really difficult. So he sacrifices. He unfortunately enters kind of like panic mode. He tries to clear out the pieces. And Magnus tricky as ever. And by the way, can we talk about bad manners right here? Magnus plays rook d1 check and promotes his pawn to a rook. I mean, we talk about disrespecting the future generation. This man is trying to make a statement. Or he's just trying to have some fun. And game number 1, unfortunately or fortunately, goes to the GOAT. 1-0 versus the future generation. But oh my goodness, they kept going. Next game, Magnus has white. He's like, you know what? That first game was a little bit shaky. Let me see what this kid is made of. We have a Grunfeld defense. All right, this is one of the most well-known openings, most studied openings. Black gives white a big center, but what black is going to do is strike at the center with the flank pawns. By the way, it's like, if you can hear rattling, it's pouring rain right now in New York, so what better way to spend it than inside watching people who are better than you play chess? And we see here Andy doing exactly that, right? We see Andy carrying out the plans of the Grunfeld, but if we talk about experience, Andy Woodward probably has about 20 games of high-level Grunfeld experience, meaning playing people better than him or equal to him in strength. Magnus Carlsen has been playing the Grunfeld since he knew what letters were, okay? He couldn't even spell Grunfeld. He was studying Grunfelds. And so he's going to try to make it very complicated, and he goes directly at Andy's king. But Andy, actually, to his credit, is, like, not concerned. A massive clash of pieces there happens, but, again, we're in an endgame. We're in an endgame with rooks, knights, and bishops. Knight to g5, Magnus still, Andy defending. Andy needed to defend against knight f7, and he's doing it. Knight e6, rook d6, position is still very much in the balance. But you'll notice that this game, Andy's the one up on time. So he changed what he did last game. Now he's up 30 seconds on the clock, and all the momentum is with him. He plays rook c8, but that's a mistake. And sometimes when you play too fast, that happens. What he had to do here was he probably had to trade bishops and just suffer in an endgame where Magnus has this beautiful horse, this beautiful Norwegian stallion. Just, that would be his fighter name, by the way. This Norwegian stallion just standing over here, defended, right, like this. Yeah, unfortunately he goes here, and it goes from bad to worse. Rook takes c6 is just game over. He wins a bishop. You can't take this back. Because if you take back, you can't take this back because you get mated. This knight is too powerful, stops the king's escape, hits the bishop, and that was a very different game. That was a very different Magnus. 2-0. All right? The series between the future and the present. The first game was shaky, but now it's 2-zip. All right? And they keep playing. D4 this game, knight f6. Last time it was a Dutch. This time it's a London. All right? It's a Queen's Pawn London system, g6, knight d2, and, I mean, Andy just playing literally what you're supposed to do in London. It doesn't matter if you're 3044 or 30.44. If your ELO is 30, you still learn the London. If your ELO is 3044, you still learn the London. Andy takes the entire center because Magnus is not touching it. Magnus plays e5. To the untrained eye, that's a free pawn after pawn takes e5, but Magnus's idea is that actually white cannot go here. He cannot go there because when everything opens, the bishop dies. And Andy is too strong to fall for that, so he gets chased around a little bit, both sides castle like is principled, and now we have a slow maneuvering game. And I think this is sort of what Andy wanted. He was like, you know what, the last game was a little bit too open, it was a little bit too much of a shootout versus Magnus, so in this game, let's just play a solid position. Unfortunately, like, you don't really have that luxury when you play Magnus. He maneuvers his queen over here, which looks beyond stupid. But actually, it's completely fine because the rook pressures, you're going to double. The queen will get out very quickly at a moment's notice. Not over there. That would be illegal. And the pressure over here is really, really strong. So, Andy goes here. Magnus takes and plays knight h5. And, I mean, his position is just crisscross applesauce all over the board. Andy, knight g6. The problem is he spent 40 seconds on that move. He sacrifices the knight to open up the position. Now, very simply, if pawn takes, bishop takes, there's a fork. However, it's like poker. You can call the bluff of your opponent and basically see what they're made of. And so Magnus thinks for 26 seconds himself. Now, both players are under a minute and a half. We have this, knight f4. Magnus gives away the rook. And a big trade happens, but black just has pressure, you know? Like, this is just annoying. Black has a knight and a light squared bishop, and white has a rook and 2 pawns. So theoretically, Andy is up a pawn of material, but it's a really tough position. Queen f, I mean, look at Magnus's material. The knights are just bulletproof. The bishop is trying to get rid of them, And here Magnus is winning if he plays bishop c8. Bishop c8 actually traps the queen. Straight up, the queen is just trapped in the middle of the board, which is kind of disgusting. Magnus plays here, and the reason that doesn't work is because queen g4, and suddenly Andy's back in the game. So now both guys have a minute. Queen g6, Magnus decides, you know what? I'm going to win because I'm going to trade the queens. We're going to win an endgame. He's young, right? Let's trade the pieces. Andy gets rid of this. Now he's got a rook. His rook enters the game. Knight c6, bishop f6, 50 seconds versus 40. Knight e5, and now we have rook and 6 versus knight, bishop, and 4. Should be a draw, but much easier to play with the two pieces. Also much easier to play when your name is Magnus Carlsen. F3. Look at Magnus coming down that board, and before you know it, it's really bad. King h2, b3. Because you push your pawn as far as possible. The point is, bishop f5, and it's just a matter of time until you get to this pawn. Andy tries to fight back, but he's down to 20 seconds. Magnus has made his life really difficult, and he's just not letting up. Bishop f5, Andy down to 17. 14. But Magnus stops the pawn, and it's just a matter of time. And even if he doesn't get to the pawn, he's going to simply win on time. It takes 53 moves. He cuts the communication. He wins the pawn. By the way, how incredible is that? Like, from this position, white is just a touch better. And at the end of the game, white's pieces are completely cut from communicating with each other. And Magnus gets in, protecting the bishop and the pawn, and gets in over here and just wins because the pawn is queening. I mean, it's ridiculous. And he does it with a 20-second time advantage, 3-0. So he beats Andy in a crazy back-and-forth game. He beats him in a game he was losing, but because he managed his time really well and kept things close, he's now up 3-0. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, oh, all right, well, it was just a drubbing. Nope. 3-0. But this was the game. Magnus played. By the way, Magnus, to his credit, did not have to keep playing. This time he plays a c3 Sicilian. He's trying not to let the kid have too much fun. d5 is the main line. Takes. Okay, knight f6, I suppose, is possible as well. I thought he just played queen d5. I've never seen somebody play knight f6. Okay, but there is queen d5 anyway. Bishop g4, Andy developing all his pieces. This is a line where there's a lot of pandemonium. You can, like, trade the queens, but instead white accepts the damage to the structure, but has open lines, has the light-scored bishop as well. And clearly, Andy a little bit on a tilt this game, as he allows Magnus to get a completely winning position in 10 moves. It happens, all right? How many of you have lost 3 games in a row? Right, literally, and I'm not, think about this. This video is gonna have, wherever it is, if this video is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you know, we upload a short, raise your hand if you've lost 3 chess games in a row. I'll wait, just right now, do it. I have no way to verify this. I've lost 3 games in a row. You remember how debilitating that feels? And then you lose like 3 more in a row? That's what's happening to Andy right now. He's allowing all of this to happen because he's a little bit on tilt. Rook c1 and knight c7. I mean, many of us would just resign here. We have no idea what we're even doing. He plays e6. Magnus straight up takes a full rook. No questions asked. It is literally +5. Look right there. You see that? It says +5. Bishop b4 check. Andy gets a pawn back. But that's checkmate. Super low key. But actually, Andy has a little bit of counterplay. And sometimes in chess, even if you're the greatest of all time, the most difficult position to win is the one where you're winning. Like, completely winning, and you think it should be trivial, but all of a sudden, you know, your opponent's trying to make a cut. But Magnus is still doing a good knight c7. You can't even take the knight. If you take the knight, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play rook d1. You can't take my queen because it's a fork. But Magnus doesn't do that. And all of a sudden, despite there being a lot of pressure on the black position, Andy starts consolidating. And again, like I said this entire game, the most difficult position to win is the one where you've been winning the whole time, f5. Andy just grabs a pawn. Now Magnus is like, wait a minute, what is happening? Let me take the pawn on a7, let me push my a and b pawns. Rook a8, check, king f7, a3. This is literally where Magnus has beaten Andy 3 out of 4 games. This is the 4th. So he's beaten him 3 out of 3 games. Scramble, some sort of endgame, 50-40. Rook d4, rook c4, rook h7. Magnus completely winning. 30 seconds and 13 seconds up. That's it. Put him away. Bishop b4, rook h1. It's just a matter of time. Andy's doing his best. Andy, this game is, to his credit, keeping pressure on the clock, but I mean, Magnus just unstoppable. Rook h2, rook... Whoa. Andy creates counterplay All Magnus has to do is walk his pawns up. He decides to sack the rook for the knight and push. Andy Woodward from the top rope, counterattack, stops both pawns. Oh my goodness. Magnus's entire position has been stopped. He now has to play defense. Here comes Andy! G3, equal material. Actually, not even equal material. Magnus is a pawn up, but he's about to be down a pawn. He has to play rook d6 or rook b1. He does, but here comes Andy. Now, the most insane defense is rook b4 check, the bishop blocks, and now the only thing you can do is push. It's the only thing you have to push, lose the bishop, accept the draw. Magnus is like, accept the draw. I'm up 3-0. But unfortunately, his ego and also split-second decision-making gets in the way. Sometimes that's what happens. You're like, nobody is thinking, I'm going to make a draw here. But after bishop c3, Andy plays the simple rook h1. And Magnus, out of nowhere, literally 5 moves ago, completely winning. Like, just put... But because Andy created just enough counterplay, all of a sudden nobody can stop the pawn. You have to sacrifice your rook, but it's just not good enough. And Andy Woodward wins the game because he queens first. And even though Magnus can get a queen, his king is dead. Andy Woodward has just beaten Magnus Carlsen, the youngest grandmaster on planet Earth right now, 13 years of age. Takes down Magnus Carlsen. Not the oldest grandmaster in the world. No, there's nothing like that. But Magnus is 33, which is ancient in chess. No, jokes aside, unbelievably impressive. And by the way, they kept battling. They kept going. They played a handful more games against each other. And I'm going to show them all to you. So this was the first win. Let's see if Andy can build on it. He's got white in the next game. He goes right back to work in London. Magnus plays this line, CD, ED, bishop f5, and this very provocative line where you give up a pawn. This is theory. Theory in chess is stuff that has been studied many, many times, and it looks like a side might be blundering, and it looks like a side might have lost the right to castle, and all of that is true, but you can tell because players have studied this already, they know that it's fine. This is what theory is. H5, we see Magnus building up a nice fort for his king, and ultimately, after a massive clash of pieces, Andy castles, but Magnus starts hunting him on that side of the board. And in this game, Andy experiences something that everybody experiences, which is an adrenaline rush after a really nice result. Sometimes you win a game and you're like, and you try to play again and you treat the chessboard like a casino, and in 20 moves you get forked and you lose. And Magnus right away sees control of it right back. So 4-1. You're good, but you got lucky, and I intend to make you realize you got lucky, all right? You got lucky in that game. I would have let you on zip, all right? 4-1. Let's go again, all right? Andy Woodward looking to right the ship. It's 4-1 right now. This time, Magnus playing again into d4, c4, knight c3. Like I said, we just saw this opening. This was a Grunfeld. And like I said in that game, he's got a lot of experience. Magnus has a lot of experience being very annoying on the white side of a Grunfeld. He's played people like Maxime Vacher-Lagrave, for example. I mean, he's been up against this legendary opening time and time again in his career. Andy in this game gets real hostile. C5, trying to attack the center. Magnus just walks right into the black position. E6, knocking on the door. Andy takes, slides the king to safety. But who's protecting the knight? Well, apparently the best move here is to play knight to b6, lose the pawn with the tempo, play knight a4, lose this pawn with the tempo, knight c3 hits the queen, sacrifice the knight, take on a1, and allow white to have a pawn 2 squares away from queening for the rest of the game. And a bishop that's, yeah, Andy doesn't do any of that. He goes here, but he just loses the knight. And this one is over in 4 moves earlier than the previous, because if bishop a1, rook a1, he's just going to take this, and 2 bishops are just better than a rook. And Andy won a game, but all of a sudden, it is back to 5-1. And Magnus is in cruise. He just wins 2 games super quick. Doesn't break, very nice win with black against the London. Very nice win. And in the very next game, something really incredible happened. D4. And Andy won in 4 moves. I don't know if Magnus disconnected. I don't know if he played these games on a plane. I don't know if his internet went out. I don't know if he got a food delivery that took more than 3 minutes because he was arguing with the I don't know what happened, but his time literally ran to 0 and he lost. I found this very funny. Can you imagine the clickbait of the video? Magnus loses to the world's youngest grandmaster in 3 moves. Yeah, I'm not that ridiculous. Maybe I should. Maybe, you know what? Never say never. That might be the name of this video. I haven't even decided. Do we count that one? I don't know. But we should count the next one. This game was played, I think, like 10 minutes later. I think Magnus reconnected. I think Magnus won one more game. D4, knight f6. And this time, Magnus played this. So he kind of played an anti-London. He did not want Andy to go back to playing bishop f4. So Andy went bishop g5. And as we can see in this position, Magnus just says, I have the queen side. I'm very happy. I'm going to build over here. And then I'll probably develop my bishop on this diagonal. So Andy says right away, I'm not going to let you be comfortable. I love that. Just like attacking the world champ right away. I can't let you get comfortable. Pawn takes a4. Bishop takes f6. The queen takes, so black doesn't get the pawn structure damage. c3 is played to block the queen from taking the pawn. Queen b6 is played to counter the pawn again. Queen c1 is played to defend the pawn. Bishop b7 attacks the pawn on d5. Now that the queen went over here to defend the pawn over here, that went when the queen went over to b6. Now we defend. Now we undermine the center, right? Chess is a logical game. Every single move these guys are making responds to the previous. Bishop c4 defends the pawn, and both sides castle. Okay, now it's time for Andy to take the pawn back. He does, and he has a slight advantage. It's a little bit difficult for black to develop pieces. White kind of controls a lot of the important squares in the black position, so Magnus goes backwards. And he plays queen f4. I mean, he's got a very active position. Got a very, very active position. I really like this position. d6, a5. Now is a tough moment. What do you do? Takes a5. Well, that's the end of the queenside pressure, and now Magnus might have a thing to say on that side of the board. So Andy decides, I can't wait. Let me open the position. Even if it means my queen being under attack, I am attacking the pawn on e6. Magnus says, no, you're not. Bishop can't attack it anymore. Takes, takes. If we don't count that game, it's 6-1, because he won another game that I didn't show you in the interest of time. It's 6-1. Technically, it's 6-2, and it looks like it's about to be 7. Bishop d3, bishop f6. He threatens this, and he says, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice. I'm sacrificing a bishop to open up Magnus's position. Worst case scenario, I have a draw. Pawn takes, queen takes, Magnus blocks, knight g5. That's mate. So Magnus defends, runs his king, queen h5. Now the threat is knight h7. You could go back. You could make a draw, right? We already saw this. Magnus had a draw maybe in hand if he played the right way, but that was a little bit different. He could play king g8 here. It's probably a draw. But he could also play king e7, and he doesn't have to make a draw. He plays queen a4 and decides I'm going to allow Andy to give me a fork, and I'm going to allow him to take my rook, but I think I'm winning because I think I'm going to protect my king, and then I'm going to block, and then I'm going to push. So Andy plays rook e1 and queen f5. I mean, this is a very dangerous position, but Magnus is defending it perfectly. The queen rotates like a pendulum, goes to g5, because like I said, a queen trade wins the game for black. Queen trade wins the game for black. Like, it's plus 0.7. After this, it's minus 0.1. Like, it's going to win the game from a practical standpoint. So Andy keeps the queen on the board. Magnus's king, meanwhile, is on a spiritual journey, and he's being protected. c4. Oh, what a move. Sacrificing a pawn to open up the king. Magnus says, no, thank you, but now pawn takes d5. Knight takes d5. Rook! He blundered. He needed to play king to d7. c4 was a brilliant move to make it practically difficult. Just make it difficult for Magnus to make a decision, and all of a sudden, the rook is on e6, and Andy, in this game, no nonsense, picks up the win. He gets another win versus Magnus. So if you count the game that he won by 4 moves, he won 3 games. If you don't count that game, it was 6-2. But here's a bonus. They played one more game a day later. This was just in it's like a bullet brawl. It's a speed tournament on chess.com. This one was a 1-minute game. So 6-2, 25% win rate. 13 years old, not so bad. This is a game that they played a day later. It started out as a very simple kind of double fianchetto setup. c4, Andy played extremely principled with white. d4, c4, both knights out, bishop out, very solid, very straightforward. Life is good. e6, queen c2, both guys bringing the rooks. Magnus trying to take a little bit more central space because you have to. You can't just sit back in a chess game and hope for the best. Andy playing it slow. Magnus not playing it slow. H5. Taking some space, disallowing G4. And he plops the knight on B5. He plops that knight there because it's actually really hard to get rid of because then you weaken this by a lot. So you can't do that. Queen C8. Knight C6. Let's trade knights. Okay, but I'm going to put my bishop on this diagonal. It's a very tense position. That attacks the queen, so I got to get out of the way. Now we're shuffling. There's a lot of shuffling going on, and it's a bullet game. And he attacks the queen side with B4. Not allowing Magnus to be comfortable. Pawn takes. Pawn takes. Knight to E4. Knight E4. Bishop E4. Bishop E4. Knight E4. Okay. What's going on? There was a big exchange. We both have a knight. We both have a dark squared bishop. I have 2. You have 3. I have more space on that side of the board. You have 3. I have 4. So dynamically, the position is in the balance. But Andy's going to try to attack Magnus's king by trading. And he's going to try to attack over here. And Magnus is going to try to defend himself. Rook D5. Both guys about 40 seconds on the clock. The queen goes back. Now we trade. Believe it or not, the best move in this position for Magnus is not to take the bishop, but to take the knight. As a human, that looks really stupid because you just allow yourself all these weaknesses, but the computer is unafraid. Just says, take the pawn. I'm never getting mated because I can sack the rook, and then I take one back. So that's the But Magnus, human being, king G7, no bishops. We have the following position. 36 versus 38, equal, but we know what happened yesterday in the couple of games that they played. King H7, here we go. Rook D1, wait a minute, Rook D1? That's a fork. Andy set a trap. Andy set a trap. And I don't know if Magnus voluntarily fell into this trap because he thought the trap didn't work. He thought that he was trapping the trapper. But I think Andy knew that maybe Magnus thought he was trapping the trapper, but actually he was trapped. It's crazy. Knight C3 is a triple fork. It's a triple fork. It hits 3, but it opens the line toward the king. Rook takes H5. One rook is now escaping from the fork. You can't take. King G7. You pin the knight to the king. That's the best move, by the way. Played in 0.4 seconds. Magnus has to take. Andy now gets a knight and a pawn for the rook, which is not enough material, but the king is butt naked. F6. Rook D5 going for the H5 pawn. Magnus defending himself. The knight hops in. Oh my goodness, this is completely nuts. The attack is so powerful. The king is also safe. Rook E5. It's a great move by Magnus, trying to trade the rooks. Andy plays the best move here, too. Knight F3, forcing Magnus to move the rook. If you take, then the queen opens up the line of sight on the C7 pawn. So when this trade happens, you can't go here. Because I take, if king G6, I take on B6, and I have too many pawns. Magnus notices that, plays rook E8. Knight to, oh my god, knight to G5 is incredible. Knight to G5 is such a ridiculous move. It is utilizing the pin on this pawn to disallow the capture. The queen is threatened. If you just go here, I play knight E6. My knight is going to live there forever. But if you take the pawn on D5, disallowing knight E6, then I take on C7, which is the pawn that your queen was protecting. Magnus decides I have to go for it. But now all of a sudden his king is really weak. King G6. Now, Andy Woodward here can simply back his knight up and play the game for the rest of eternity. But instead, he goes for the glory. He thinks for 12 seconds, and he plays queen H7 check. He goes all in, and the king is out in the open. Andy Woodward has sacrificed his knight. He is down a full rook. But it's only a draw. He has a draw here by perpetual check if he creates a fortress around the king and makes a draw by repetition. Instead, he goes all in, and it's losing. But Magnus has to find why. Queen G3 is literally mate. G3, King H3, there's mates swirling. Queen F6, there are mates swirling. Magnus, unfortunately, finds the best move. Not only is that a threat on the queen, it is a threat of checkmate. So Queen F6 has to be check. And now the only winning move is Rook G5. If you play King G4, Queen F4 is literally mate. Rook G5 is winning. Queen G5 is a draw. Rook G5 is winning because if you play F4 now, Queen G2 is mate. It's crazy. I mean, there are mates all over the board, but Magnus goes here thinking the attack is done, but it's not. Pawn to G3 and Queen G2 is a mate. So now the only winning move is Queen G7. Magnus, with 14 seconds, does not find it. And not only does he not find it, he walks into a fork! He loses his queen, he loses the rest of his pawns, and on the 50th move of the game, he loses the entire game. And Andy Woodward beats Magnus Carlsen 2 games in a row. He beat him in the last Blitz game that they played, and he beats him in the only bullet game that they have ever played in a crazy position where he sacrificed material to bring Magnus's king forward. This is awesome. You can add Andy Woodward to the list of the young players that have managed to get a win against Magnus. He has never played him over the board. I would imagine it would go differently in a serious face-to-face tournament. But this is so cool because Andy became a grandmaster 2 months ago, and he's 13. And never before in history could you play a player that was 20 years older than you. 20. And get a couple of competitive games against them and even beat them. Andy Woodward was not even born when Magnus, I think, crossed number 1 in the world. That's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed. Get out of here.